Hello, I'm Charis, and I've been working with the Clark Howard team for about 9 years. Throughout this time, I've written about saving money, getting out of debt, scams, and more. The majority of my time, I've been a part of the Clark Deals team, finding great bargains to help you save more of what you make. But today, I want to tell you about a scam that I believe could be the worst any of us will ever experience in our lifetimes. Not only can it leave you penniless at possibly the most vulnerable time in your life, but it can also make all the hard work and diligence of saving money for yourself and your family evaporate into thin air. Not only that, but if you or a loved one requires 24/7 care, you may find yourself in a dangerous situation that is nearly impossible to escape from. The type of scam I'm referring to involves the deliberate theft of assets through different avenues in the conservatorship and guardianship space. Con artists in this space look for vulnerabilities in family dynamics, whether or not an elder has capacity, which is the legal ability of the elder to make decisions on behalf of themselves and their estate, whether or not the at risk elder has someone designated as their power of attorney and healthcare power of attorney, and the process of guardianship and conservatorship, depending on the state. These criminals especially like to target people who have accumulated vast amounts of wealth, a significant nest egg, to care for themselves and their families. In this video, we're going to talk about what conservatorships and guardianships are, hear from some experts in the space, and listen to one heartbreaking story. If you've ever watched the Netflix movie I Care a Lot, although fictional, it does a really good job of showing what can happen with this type of scam. Experts say that most people working in this space are honest, but if you happen to get caught in the web of one of these con artists, you may never get out of it. My family and I have been personally touched by this issue, and I want to tell you, you want to avoid it at all costs. That's why I want to try to warn as many people as possible. The bottom line is, I believe everyone needs to know about this issue, especially if they've listened to Clark over the years and have worked hard to be responsible and create a nest egg for themselves in hopes of passing along their assets to their loved ones. The reality is, for victims of this type of scam, it is one they may never be able to recover from. So, let's dive in. So, Poppy Helgren, it's so nice to talk with you, and thank you so much for being on. I'm just, I know that we know about your story in our family, and that's the reason why we got to know you and your story. And so, I'm just really grateful that you've just been able to come on with us today to talk about what actually happened with your dad and everything around that, because I think it's so important for people to hear how this kind of situation can go. And so, do you want to just tell us, just kind of talk us through like your family dynamic, how your relationship was with your dad before this all started, and just kind of go from there?
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to tell my dad and my story. I really appreciate that. I'm an only child, and my parents, Lester and Lou Moore, were Southerners that moved to California in the 1950s. And they were survivors of the Great Depression. My dad was from Arkansas. My mother was from Texas. My dad had gone into the Navy, got out of the Navy in 1951. Around 2007, I was notified from his doctor that there were some concerns about my father's cognition issues. Around the same time, my dad said to me, I seem to be slipping. I can't do my checkbooks the way I used to. Well, I was pregnant at that time in 2008, but within a few months, I did go to California. I lived in Nevada, so about 300 miles away from my dad, and saw that he had kind of a mess on his hand with bills everywhere. And I helped him get bills together. In late 2009, I had met with his Kaiser physicians that had known him for decades, and they were concerned as well. They told me that I needed to get him to stop driving, which we did. We got his license taken away, and I moved him to Nevada to be with me. He stayed there 2 weeks, but about that time, a girlfriend he had had said she wanted him to come back to Thousand Oaks to visit. And he was absolutely adamant that he go back to visit her. So on Thanksgiving Day, 2009, I drove him back to Thousand Oaks. And, he was always kind of a ladies' man. So I knew that he would, have a lady in his life. But as I was going through bills around of his in early 2010, I saw he had been writing checks out to her for $400, $600, $700 all along since early 2004. And this is something I didn't know about because as close as I was to my dad, we didn't discuss stuff like that. I wasn't into his finances until he invited me to be in there. So I was very alarmed with this. And I did move forward to take over as the successor trustee of my family trust. The trust had been made by my parents in 1993. I was the successor trustee should anything happen to them through death, or there's something called a competency clause in there. Should two physicians say that one or the other of them was incompetent, I would take over as the successor trustee. So I did get the two physicians at Kaiser in California to write the letters that he was not competent to take care of his physical or financial needs. And I took over as the successor trustee in January of 2010. Now, I thought I was fairly safe with things being the successor trustee and being on accounts. About that same time, I got a bank statement from Chase that said a $162,000 account had been closed. I'm going, wait a minute, am I reading this right? And I called up the person that had changed it over. It said Moore Family Trust on the top, Poppy Helgren trustee. It did not say Lester Moore on it, my dad's name. It said my name. So I get a hold of them and they said, well, you withdrew it. I said, no, I did not. And they looked and then he called me back and the bank manager and he said, oh, well, it was electronically removed. $162,000 was electronically removed from this account. And it was done according to, I will never forget this, industry standards. So I said, what is going on here? I said, I'm the only signer on the account. I'm the successor trustee. I said, can I do this with Brad Pitt, get into Brad Pitt's account and withdraw it electronically? Can I do that? And of course, he was full of excuses at that time. Within a couple of weeks, I found out what had happened. I got a packet from another attorney um, that had been hired by my dad and the girlfriend to change the trust documents. I'd never heard of this lawyer before, and it said, you are no longer the successor trustee. I am the successor trustee, the attorney said, and I am your dad's attorney. And all of this has been, your dad signed off that the powers of attorney, all of this stuff is no longer set with you.
So he had a trust set up. You were the successor trustee. And then somehow the girlfriend and him get a lawyer after it's determined that he is lacking sound capacity, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. My attorney called this other attorney that had changed everything, and he told him that we have the paperwork. Poppy is the successor trustee. There was a trust, and everything was done according to, the laws. And this attorney would not back down. So we did end up putting in for conservatorship, and that was October, November timeframe. And by January, we were in court.
Okay, so your lawyer advised you to do what's called a conservatorship. And
Yes.
so when he started to talk to you about what that is, I'm sure you had questions like, well, why do I need to do that? We already had a trust.
I said to him, and of course, retrospect is always much clearer. If I knew then what I know now, it would have been a totally different story. But my failure was trusting the answers that I got. I thought that this lawyer was, guiding me correctly. He told me that the judge is a good judge. In the probate court, he gave me his name. He said, you can look him up. He's very good and very honest. And he said that this is the only way we can do this. I was not aware of what goes on in the real world that I'm aware of. 14 years later, I know all kinds of stuff have happened all over this country that's very similar, where people are railroaded into these conservatorships, or as they're called in other states, guardianships, and they're pushed in there. And unfortunately, I was ignorant and trusting.
So they basically told you, this lawyer told you, conservatorship is the answer. That's how we're going to get your dad back. So how did it go from there?
So our first court date was in January of 2011, and my dad, the girlfriend, the lawyer were all sitting there. And the judge said, well, he put it off for another court date after he had appointed a variety of lawyers to be receivers of the money and all of this stuff. And I sat there, and I guess I expected a little more timeliness with this. I didn't expect this to be dragged on. But on that day, I remember in detail walking out. It's a small courthouse, fairly small. In the parking lot, everybody parks at the same place. And I was following all these lawyers that got these assignments, paid assignments, by the way, for out of my dad's assets. I followed them out to the parking lot where my car was parked. And I saw, the fancy suits, custom made suits, and the Italian leather shoes, and, the Mercedes and the Jaguars, and all the fancy cars out there. And I thought, my God, these people are vultures coming in to get his money. That was the first thing that went through my head. And so, of course, my attorney said, "Oh, this will come out ahead. You'll get appointed conservator." I didn't need to be appointed conservator. I was already the successor trustee. It wasn't until May of the following year, 2012, that the judge decided to appoint a conservator over my father, and it wasn't me.
So what was the reason that the court gave, the reason he gave it to an outside fiduciary and not you?
It's interesting because I had no siblings to fight with. It wasn't a family fight like that. All of my dad's many brothers and sisters were on my side with this. They could see what was going on. They had met the girlfriend. They didn't like her. They did not trust her. Um, Apparently, my attorney that railroaded me into this, he said, well, once you get back in with your dad, we can get you replaced as the conservator. So I was led to believe that it was because my dad was angry with me. Never mind that he had been lied to repeatedly, that I was trying to put him in a nursing home. They told him, the attorney constantly harped in my dad's ear that I had stole money. And my dad would parrot that. He would say, well, Poppy stole $60,000. All I did was put the money under the me as the trustee. I never, and it was proven in court, and the judge finally admitted that a year later, that it was proven that I never, misappropriated any money. But this was a man that had dementia. They're easily under undue influence. And so him being mad at me, my father being mad at me, was based on lies from the girlfriend and from that attorney that she brought in to change things.
So then, as you're kind of in court, and now this new fiduciary is in charge of everything, what's happening with that?
Oh boy. Um, she put in somebody to live in the house with him. She was paying, oh my gosh, it was $25 an hour for a caregiver, which was not a nurse, to stay in the house with him. So she was billing and billing and billing for herself and for her attorney. This went on for quite a while. Meanwhile, I was working with my attorney and paying him, telling him I want to get my dad back to Arkansas, or I want him to move here to Nevada. Well, the conservator's response was always, he doesn't want to move to Nevada. He wants to stay in California. Well, anybody that's ever known my dad knew that he hated California. He had all kinds of interesting names for that state, and he wanted to be back in Arkansas. So, but we were, stonewalled there. We were told he couldn't leave the state to go to his brother's funeral, who died in 2016. In Arkansas, because I asked her, can he please go to his brother's funeral? And she said, no, he can't go. So needless to say, he never set foot again in the state of Arkansas In 2016, they sold all of his property in Arkansas. They sold his income producing ranch. It had oil wells, it had gas rights, um, and mineral rights. He had animals from neighboring ranchers that would graze on his land, and he would get paid for that. But they sold it, and they sold everything, all the farming equipment, the ranching equipment that was on the property, and there was never an itemized inventory of what they sold in the four homes that were on the property. He had antique cars. He had a lot of memorabilia. The houses were full because they had been partially moving there. And so everything was gone, you know.
And all of that was supposed to go to your family, right? Because you're the only child, you're the sole heir of your father's estate, and that was supposed to go to your family and your kids and all this land and the farm and everything. And not only was it sold, but it wasn't accurately accounted for. So there likely wasn't, it wasn't given the value maybe that it was worth, and not to mention the sentimental value of all of that.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't paid at a high rate. They usually just take cash and run with it. But yeah, it makes me sick. He bought that property in 1956. He was still in his 20s at the time when he bought that property with the idea of moving there. I mean, this was before I was even born. And he had bought more property in the years since, and that was his dream. What happens to somebody's American dream of, whatever it is, as long as it's legal, we should be able to have our dreams and be able to pursue them. And they squashed that. Even though he did everything right, it was ignored, it was disregarded. And that's where we ended up. And it breaks my heart when I think of that property because I was there many times over the years. That's where we would go on vacation, and I had a love for the land too. I mean, that's the only thing you can really have. You can have a house that burns down or whatever, but the land, if that's yours, that's yours. But it was gone. Oh my God. When he found that out, he just screamed and nothing I could do about it, even though I did look into what does a conservator have the ability to sell property off in a whole other state where this doesn't even make sense to me. In 2020, I found out his house was for sale, that he was living in Thousand Oaks, the home that I had grown up in since 1967. I tried to get that stopped, and they said, you know what? I was told by the judge, if I wanted to, I could purchase the home.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness. Oh my goodness.
That wasn't the point. I didn't want to move to Thousand Oaks. I didn't want to purchase it. I should have inherited it the way it was supposed to be. So they sold the house, and everything in it was discarded, including apparently his wedding ring that I never got back and never got an answer for. And then they put him in a group home in Camarillo. They put him in a group home, and I was able to see the house for the last time in early February 2020. I saw him on the same day for the last time. I went and saw him in the group home. I was never allowed to come back and see him, even though, I'm the daughter. But they said, oh, well, COVID, you can't see him because of COVID. Well, I know for a fact, working in the healthcare profession that I did, that Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services did not say that you can't see. If somebody is near death, if somebody is an elderly person that needs to see their loved ones, I should have been able to see him at least through a window visit. And I had been boosted on shots and everything anyway. So he died about 11 and a half months after I saw him. I was notified by email by the conservator that he had died.
So wait, let me stop you right there. So your father was moved to assisted living because they're seeing his decline. They sold his house, the one that you grew up in, and then you are notified by email of his
Oh,
passing?
yeah. Yes. I
Okay.
never got a phone call from them. I will never forget reading that email. I was absolutely horrified. It took me a few months to get the medical records. I had to fight for them because they said he had a conservator and they couldn't give it to me, the daughter. I said, well, he's passed away. So I did get the medical records. And since that's what I do for a living, I read through the medical records from the hospital and I saw very clearly what had happened. It was all due to negligence of the group home that allowed him to get so impacted with feces that he became septic. He had septic shock and his organs shut down. Now, granted, he was 92 when he passed away, but they weren't following doctor's orders and giving him stool softeners that they were aware that he needed and were ordered by the doctor, and they did not, medicate him as was appropriately, and he died as a result.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness. Okay, so he passes in 2021. Is that right? Okay. So at that point, you would think, shouldn't the conservatorship dissolve and then the remaining assets go to you? What happens after your father passes away?
no. Yeah, you would think the conservatorship would be is supposed to end at death. It was not ended until March 15th of 2022 in a courtroom where the conservatorship was ended. And the judge said that he was going to hold back $250,000 of the assets in a holdback fund.
And during this period, your father's not even alive.
No, the charges were absolutely amazing. The itemized charges for what they were doing and making money off of a dead man's trust. It is a racket. Conservatorship is a racket. It is not to protect elderly people with dementia or other things. It's not protecting them. It is a means of grabbing their money, billing for whatever silly stuff they can come up with that a judge is going to approve. And it takes the assets of hardworking people like my parents and people of the generation that saw poverty, in the Depression, and they're grabbing this money for themselves.
What would you say to someone who kind of just wants to protect their assets, protect their family?
That's a hard one. The reason being because, trusts are touted as the protection for your assets and for your family. We were unlucky. We were very unlucky. But there are all kinds of corrupt people out there. They grab up money. Just be very careful and do not trust people. Just, and I hate to say it that way, but it's the truth. And I
Mhm.
don't even know how I'm going to take care of my own stuff at this point, but I feel an urge that I need to do it at my age and with my kids because I would hate to see them get ripped off. I mean, they already got ripped off this ranch. I have a son that is a horse enthusiast. He was in the horse cavalry in the army. He loves horses, and all I could have seen is him riding horses on that land in Arkansas. He loved that kind of stuff, and he doesn't get the opportunity to do it. He's 30 years old. He'll never get to do that. Oh,
Goodness, that is heartbreaking. I am so sorry about what's happened to your family, and I'm just really grateful for you taking the time to share your story to warn other people. And I really hope that something really great comes out of this story for you guys and your family. It is just heartbreaking, and so I hope that many people get to watch this and just be warned about what could happen with unscrupulous individuals that are corrupt in these specifically elder type industries that are kind of predators. They are very much predators. So thank you so much for all of your time and sharing your story. We so appreciate it.
oh, thank you so much for asking me. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
So, Carol, thank you so much for being on with us today. I'm so excited to talk with you, and you've been such a huge help to our family as we've been going through something. And so, I'm just really grateful for you setting aside this time to talk through these issues. And I know you've been working in this space for a really long time. How many years now has Fate been in operation?
40.
40. Wow. So where are some hot spots where you see maybe more of this kind of activity where there is corruption, there's elder abuse going on? Are there any hot spots in the United States?
When it comes to conservatorships, I've got 9 banker boxes of cases all over the country, and I don't think it's different in any other state because the courts all operate the same. But I think it's more disturbing what's going on in conservatorships than it is really in conservatorship abuse rather than nursing home abuse because it involves the court. And I find that very troubling that these cases have a judge that can, slam down the gavel and take all of your rights away from you. And basically pointing the fingers at family members that they're fighting or the person would have better oversight or care and watch their finances by a third party that nobody knows.
Wow, so you brought up a good point about, a lot of experts say that typically family members are the ones that are stealing from other relatives. But have you found that to be the case with the people that you've spoken to?
Probably in all the hundreds of cases that has been the problem. That they're, one there's a lot of sibling rivalry. So one family member not necessarily steals the money, but maybe has more control over mom and dad, and they get the money, they borrow the money, never return it. And then the other siblings, there's sibling rivalry. I've seen a lot of that, but I've seen more of the public and private fiduciaries taking the money than I have the children.
So you were involved with Poppy Helgren's case,
Yes.
and we just spoke with Poppy for this interview. And so, when people call you, is that what typically happens to people?
If the court chooses to eliminate the family from all control over the conservatee, they have all the power to do that. And I don't get any good cases. So I've had a lot of cases that courts just say, you're not your mother's power of attorney anymore. You're not your mother's anything. We're appointing a private conservator, and that's it. I mean, and then if you want to fight that, you have to file a court action. You have to have and a lot of people don't have the money to fight all this because it's very expensive. A lot of people don't even have the money to get their own conservatorship. And people say, well, you can't do anything unless you have a conservatorship. Well, I don't believe in that. So the system seems to be forcing people to get conservatorships. And to me, it's a vehicle for lawyers to make a lot of money, court system to make money. It's always about the money. So for somebody who holds the power of attorney that has a family member in a nursing home or assisted living or whatever, and that family member is trying to make decisions for their loved one, and somebody says, well, wait a minute, that's not the best decision. Let's call in either Adult Protective Services or let's call in somebody authority and let's file and get that person conserved. Well, then they'll file what's called an ex parte motion. That means emergency. And so some private guardian, through their lawyers, you have to have a lawyer, they'll file a petition for an ex parte motion to take over the control of the family member. It's granted immediately. So, and I'm working on a case right now. They did that immediately. They seized not only the husband, they seized him. He's in a nursing home. They seized the wife and all of her mail. So now, I just yesterday had to file a complaint. They deprived her of her monthly income because they seized her mail, and her monthly checks come to her in the mail. So now the guardian, public guardian, has her mail and has not paid her rent. And what's today, the 11th? Well, today is the 11th, and she's in violation of her lease. And now she's worried that they're going to remove her from her apartment. So I'm fighting that battle too. I mean, it's just one thing after another. And why these people do it, most counties, everybody's broke. California, had this big surplus of money. Now we don't. So I think all these agencies, counties, cities, all looking for vehicles to make money, to bring, money into their coffers so they can pay their bills or their staff or whatever. And I just think it's happening because they're trying to generate more money for the county.
Wow. So how does that work? So you have somebody and, the court says, oh, you don't have the capacity to make your own decisions anymore. So we're going to put you into private conservatorship or public conservatorship. So how does that money get routed from the individual, the victim, to the government or all these other people?
There's private conservators and there's public guardians. The money that gets into the government coffers is through public guardians. Now, I've got a case right now that I'm working on in another county in California where the woman has an estate of about $47 million. It went to the public guardian, but there are 10 lawyers involved. So guess what? Cha-ching, cha-ching. Her estate is paying all these legal fees, all these lawyers, and they're draining her estate, and they've hidden her. made up stories about a guy who and his wife who worked for her for many years, and her realtor, who's a retired police officer, their realtor, and he was selling some of her property that she wanted to sell. Well, she fell and broke her hip, ended up in the hospital. This is how it happens. She ended up in the hospital, and somebody in that hospital has a connection, public guardian's office. Call was made, said, oh, Mrs. So-and-so is here in the hospital, and we think she's being taken advantage of. She needs to be conserved. Public guardian swooped in, conserved her. She got placed her to her out of the hospital and put her somewhere, and nobody knows where she's at. At that time, then nobody knew where she was. So the people that were close to her found her. Somehow they found her. They went to the nursing home, and she was livid. She was a German lady, came from Germany after the war, worked hard. As her husband died, daughter died, she was all alone, and she entrusted these people and named them her power of attorney and successor trustee to pay off, her estate, whoever she wanted to leave her money to, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when the county found out about that, they said, oh no, he coerced her. He and the wife were stealing her money. They just made all these stories up and took control of her and then hid her out. Well, when they found her, she said, get me out of here. All I have, they took my phone away from me. I don't have my purse. I have nothing here but a toothbrush and a pair of socks. And this is a very wealthy woman. And so they left, and they went back the next day, and she was gone. That was about a year and a half ago. We haven't found her yet.
Wow. So she still hasn't been found.
No, we don't even know if she's alive.
If someone is, listening to this, watching this, and they're like, oh my gosh, what can I do to protect myself? What would your recommendation be?
The number one thing, you better go to a good trust attorney. You better go to somebody that's got a good reputation, check that person out, make sure that that person is pure of heart, that doesn't have, and that's also difficult, but I always say, call it, if you want to have a trust attorney, you don't know who this person is, ask him for referrals. Can I call a couple of your clients and see how you did and whatever? But you just have to be aware that there's always somebody out there that's going to try to take your money away from you. And it's always about the money. Luckily I've got a will and a trust and a family, and the lawyers in my family. I'm sure that if something happens to me and somebody was going to violate my trust, my lawyer brother would be all over that.
Well, Carol, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all of your years of service trying to help people with these issues. It's just a horrible problem. I really hope that we get some movement in solving it and put some checks and balances in place so that people's, money they worked so hard for can be preserved and they can keep it for the purpose that they intended it for, instead of in the hands of corrupt people in these systems. So I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope this all makes a difference.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for being on today. So I know that you started an organization called SEER, and I'd love to hear a little bit about, as we get started, how that organization got started, more about your story, and just kind of how you got into this space.
Sure. Unfortunately, like most activists, you're touched by an event in life that completely changes your perspective. Sadly, often for the worse. In 2013, my wife's dad was taken captive. He was being exploited, and when we stepped in to try to help him, he was taken captive in Las Vegas. And the police refused to take any action, and we were guided by the police to file for guardianship. And that took us into an odyssey that I didn't think could happen in our country. And over the last now 11 years, we've investigated or counseled well over 5,000 cases. I haven't done the research on it, but I think we've taken at least one case from every state and territory in the United States. So we've more than studied the system, its dysfunction, and now we've been aggressively trying to get leadership to take action that reduces the victimization nationwide.
Wow, wow. So when you say that you've spoken to over 5,000 people since you all got started, are these all people that have had some level of estate theft in their lives, or what kind of situations are you encountering?
If you become vulnerable, and vulnerable can come in many shapes and sizes. You become vulnerable when you're alone. You become vulnerable when you're disabled, and that can happen. And when we talk about this, this is about adults. So 18 to 118, if you're lucky enough to live that long, anybody in that spectrum can be targeted and taken advantage of. So disabled, seniors, alone, families with dysfunction. If you have a black sheep in your family that you have included or excluded from your estate plans, they will often be solicited by attorneys looking to find that opportunity to take advantage of generations of wealth in the family, even with the best of estate documents. Our guidance is always be prepared. What people need to understand, particularly in the most perverted courts in this country, this has become an uncontrolled profit center. And the rules do not apply. The laws do not apply. And most people are not getting counsel, number one. If they do, the counsel understands that the only way they keep making money in an environment is by accepting the dysfunction of the system. So they won't timely appeal, or they won't zealously appeal. So the victim loses twice because, one, they've been targeted, but now the system completely lets them down in their effort to, or proclaimed effort to protect. So be prepared with those documents. Be prepared with those agents that you trust. That is absolutely critical, because we will likely, if we live long and we take care of ourselves, we will become vulnerable before we pass. It's very well known, age-associated vulnerabilities. They start at about 60. You lose between 1% and 3% of your mental capabilities per year as you age. That makes you vulnerable. Decisions, awareness that you would have at 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, you don't have at 60, 70, 80, and 90. And the predators who operate within this environment know those numbers and dynamics quite well.
All right. So if somebody was to call you today and say, I've just heard about this conservatorship, estate fraud, theft issue, what should I do? What are like your top tips for me to protect myself from this kind of situation?
Well, number one is make sure those documents have been executed, the durable power of attorney, the healthcare advance directive, and you have chosen trusted agents to be designated on those documents, and give them a copy. Get with them, work as a team. You're always going to get beaten if you're trying to defend this in isolation. So get your team together, the agents on your documents, and if this is a petition has been filed, somebody's trying to put me in guardianship. If you walk into the vast majority, and on this one, I'm 90% plus on probability, and you go in and you have your agents with you and you defend those estate documents and you declare that there is no need for a guardianship, you will likely avoid it. We've done it dozens and dozens of times. Where the problem lies is if you don't have those documents, and if you have dementia, Alzheimer's type dementia, and you lose your ability to consistently declare your testamentary desires and wishes, that's often when the predators move in. It'll start with isolation, but then the actions, the real severe actions that damage the estate or damage the well-being of the individual, often occurs after they've lost their ability to speak for themselves. And at that point, there's really nothing you can do. If you don't have the documents and the targeted individual has lost their ability to protect themselves, you will become a victim of the predators that operate in this system. But if it's prior, you object voraciously that the order should not be signed. It's unnecessary. You have the appropriate help, and to remind the judge that they have an obligation to the least restrictive alternative, which includes his involvement in any way, shape, or form in your decision-making or estate. And more than 9 times out of 10, when you present it that way to a judge, they'll back off. And even if they're a participant, they often will find an easier target to help their friends take advantage of because it's clear if you come into the proceeding that way, you understand what's in store and they understand that you understand. And that's part of being prepared.
So, how old would you suggest, what age, I guess, would you suggest somebody start putting together these documents?
At 18,
Wow.
we we can be sent to war and die when we're 18. Um, there are you become an independent adult in this country at 18, and the lawyers know that better than anyone. So if you have a child and they're driving, which they all do today, and they have a car accident and they sustain a brain injury, um, you will not be able to protect them if a party has chosen to intercede to object to your ability to do so, or a hospital has. So our guidance is as soon as you turn 18, you execute those documents. At 18, those agents are going to be your parents, likely, maybe grandparents. And as you move through life, because these are living documents, when you get married, it changes. And that's also important here. A spouse does not speak for a spouse without those documents in a court of law, in a hospital. So 18 is when you do them. You continue to update them as major life changes occur, until you take your last breath.
Is there anything else that you want people to know about this issue?
Yeah, the awareness is number one. I would strongly suggest buy the book. It's on Amazon. We're Here to Help When Guardianship Goes Wrong by Diane Diamond, published by Brandeis University Press, joint venture really between their law school, their journalism school, to get the word out that this is a growing, ever-present issue nationwide, and the public needs to be educated on the issues. I would also ask, most people don't know who their state reps, assembly person, or senators are. Make an appointment with your local state rep and senator and tell them that you're concerned about this, and ask them, push them, demand that they take greater action to adopt the Nevada reforms. And we can talk about those reforms, but there needs to be much more done in this country to protect our vulnerable adult population from predatory attorneys.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And is that list available on your website so that other people from other states can review that?
It all is, yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, Rick, thank you so much for your time today and sharing all the information that you shared. You're doing such great work to protect the elderly and keep them out of this snare and this huge, scam that's been going on. And so we're just so grateful to have you.
And thank you, Charis, for your interest. It's important. Thank you.